Hello, welcome and good evening Bangladesh, good afternoon London, and a very warm welcome to all of you out there in Facebook land, wherever you are. Very nice to have you here along with us. My name is David Maynard and I'm the Director for Education with the British Council in Bangladesh. I'm normally based in Dhaka and have been there for 3 years, but during the current COVID-19 situation, I'm back at my home base in Germany. I'm joined today by two very special guests as part of our discussion about education matters. And over the last couple of months, we've had several sessions at the British Council talking about education in these exceptional times. Today, we're going to be looking at higher education, focusing on higher education and looking at how systems and universities and educational institutions are dealing with this exceptional situation that we all find ourselves in at the moment. Obviously, the world is struggling with this current situation and education has been very badly affected worldwide. So we all face this current situation. This session is designed to be a sharing session where we are looking at different ways of dealing with this situation, looking at how different universities deal with it and sharing knowledge, sharing experience. And we also want to hear from you, the viewers and listeners who are on Facebook today. What do you think about these questions? What do you think about these topics? So if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the comments section in Facebook, and we will pick up those questions throughout the session. At the end of the session, there will be a time for some questions and answers, and my guests will answer some of those questions. If we cannot get through all of the questions, then please don't worry, we will get back to you at some point in the next couple of days once we've looked through all of the questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guests. I'd like to welcome Professor Simon Walker from University College London. Simon, over to you, just to introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, hello everybody. A very warm welcome from London. Good evening, Bangladesh. And a particular good hello to all the Kettle directors, which we've worked with over the last couple of years. So my name is Simon Walker. I'm a professor at University College London, and I'm academic lead for the Vice Provost Education Office, leading on things like curriculum design and more recently in assessment. Thank you, David.
Okay, wonderful to have you on board. And as Simon mentioned, Simon has been working over many years with higher education in Bangladesh, so has quite a bit of knowledge about how the system works, about how the universities work together, both the public and private universities. And so it's good to have you on board, given all of your background knowledge. Our other special guest is Professor Dr Masuma Habib, but I fear she might have dropped off the line. Dr. Masuma is based at the Bangladesh Agricultural University in Mymensingh, and obviously that university has a lot of experience in dealing with many students, both face-to-face and online, and so we're particularly keen to hear from her about how that particular university and public universities in general are dealing with this situation with COVID-19 at the moment. It would appear that Masuma has dropped off the line. I hope she will be back again soon, at which point I will introduce her. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do at the moment. Oh, maybe she's back. Hello, Masuma.
She's back.
Hello.
And I've just introduced you and said that you were offline, but hopefully back. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself and say what you do?
I'm Professor Masuma Habib. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
I can. The video is
I'm Dr. Masuma Habib, Professor Graduate Training Institute and Director, Center of Excellence Teaching and Learning, Bangladesh Agricultural University. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining. I hope the line stays live. Right, so the aim of today's discussion is, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's to look at how universities in the UK and universities in Bangladesh are dealing with this exceptional circumstance during COVID-19, and perhaps to share some ideas, to get some ideas from you, our viewers and listeners, and also see what the future might hold in both countries in terms of how what they call the new normal will look like when it comes to education, and particularly higher education. Obviously, online is going to be something that gets discussed a lot, but will be interesting to see what that actually means. So, Simon, if I can first turn to you, if I can ask you, how is the University College London and the UK education sector in general dealing with this situation at the moment?
Great, thank you, David. What I'd like to do is to share some slides with you, if that's okay, and just talk through some slides. So I'm going to share my screen, and please tell me when when you don't want me to share the slides anymore. Okay.
Okay. No, we'll look forward to that. Sounds interesting.
Good. And okay, here we go. Start sharing. So I hope that you can see. Oops, and that one there. Hopefully you can see the slides, can you?
Yes, I can.
You can, good. So it was very interesting because I came back from Bangladesh in, I think it was February, having worked there for a few days for the conference, just as the COVID was accelerating across the world. So we knew about it in China, and then it started to move across. And we were sort of, as we were flying back to the UK, we were wondering whether at some point, we would be tested and things like that. And so we arrived back in the UK at this point where we weren't quite sure what to do, and I worked for a number of different universities. I have some consultancy for the London School of Economics. I was working for Westminster University as well, doing some consultancy. So it was very interesting just looking at the kind of different responses I think that universities were taking. But what I'd like to do is just to talk about what UCL did, and maybe look at the end, possibly in some of the questions about the how some of the other universities are dealing with that. So I'll move on. So we decided to close the university as a face-to-face institution around the 18th of March. I can't remember exact date, but it's towards the end of term 2. And I think we were one of the first. A couple of other universities went into lockdown, what we called lockdown, 1 or 2 weeks later. And we called this the emergency pivot. So all of a sudden we were pivoting from face-to-face to an online situation for the remaining weeks of teaching, and then for assessment. And we've got quite a large center of different central units. So we brought together the unit which I work in, which is the kind of staff development unit called ARENA, Center for Educational Research-Based Teaching, our digital education unit, and then the group of faculty learning technologists. And we set up some principles. So we thought at the beginning, as we were locking down, as we were going online and still teaching, we absolutely needed the clarity of what we were doing. So we needed very, very clear messages about we are going online, and this is what you should expect. We used our institutional services. So we've got a virtual learning environment called Moodle. We used a synchronous system called Blackboard Collaborate, a bit like this sort of Skype call, if you like. And then we also had a webcast system where we could record videos, and we also used Microsoft Teams as well. In terms of replacing the live teaching, we suggested that people should pre-record their content, and then we set up different types of alternatives for interactive sessions. And then at that point, we thought we're going to have to change, depending. No one quite knew what to expect, so we thought exam season is coming up. We have a huge number of face-to-face invigilated exams, and we rent this enormous conference center once a year for five weeks of the year. It costs us something like £1.3 million just to rent that, and we put in thousands and thousands of exams. So we realized we would have to create some alternatives to those exams. So again, this is what we had: Moodle for sharing resources, and we had Blackboard Collaborate for the webinar style teaching sessions, the video capture, and then we also use the video capture from the previous years as well. The other thing we did, we set up very quickly a website called Teaching Continuity, and at the time, I remember gathering lots and lots of resources from different universities and putting that up onto the International Learning Design cross-institutional network page, which I kind of manage. So just pulling together any resources that you could do to help staff, because we recognized that staff were very, very inexperienced. Many staff were very inexperienced in the online version of their teaching and assessment. So the first thing we did, we offered the Blackboard Collaborate, so synchronous online training. So in other words, a bit like this Skype, Facebook call, how do you do that? What are the kind of the tips and what are the issues around doing that? Our Vice Chancellor emphasized the kind of humanity and kindness. So it was a really key thing about that. So there was a sense that we're all in this together. We don't quite know, what it's all about, how people are being impacted. We've done some research actually now on both the staff and student experience, but at the time we didn't know what the impact might be. So underpinning that was a sense of, patience, kindness, humanity, and not to try and stress our students and our staff out by all of this. We then started to get sort of more organized and realized that there was another term, so we had to establish a kind of a strong teaching presence, online teaching presence for that, and we started to organize teams for doing that and started to think about the training. But certainly the teaching was the first thing, and then we started thinking about the assessments. When we came to assessments, we realized this is what the Excel Center looks like with all those students in there. We realized we're going to have to change that. We can't do that. In fact, the Excel Center was converted into a hospital, so actually there's no way we could have used it anyway. So so next slide. This is the kind of the look of it. So 2,000 exams, half were turned into coursework. We got rid of a load of them. We took out all the first year assessments and exams and replaced those just with a piece of coursework. Seemed to work. Then we got to the end of April and we put in place this military style command. So we had a gold, silver, bronze with different sort of aspects to those things. But it was very, we ended up with this sort of Teams meetings and a lot of activity. Everyone was working from home and constantly in these Teams meetings trying to organize things. Not that productive, quite stressful as well. What we realized was what we did then won't be enough for next year. So we then put in planning for next year and we said, actually, next term is going to be online and we're going to have to change our assessments as well. So in terms of the staff and student experience of this sort of pivot, there were challenges with the live seminars. So things like, who's going to take turns in terms of teaching? What are the cues? Discussion was very, very difficult. You had connections that dropped in and dropped out of them. So we recognized quite quickly that students really appreciated certain resources like handouts, PowerPoints and recordings. And there were definitely issues around time zones. Lots of our students are international and they went home. So we then decided to call this scheme, if you like, our response connected learning. And we said we've got to have simplicity. That's the key thing. We need to have some consistency. Put in place the planning. We need to have low bandwidth approaches, so not synchronous, not real time like this, for example, but have some things which are accessible when someone gets online. They can still access stuff. It's not live, in other words. Very, very much focused on students doing the activities and absolutely not doing dual mode. Okay, so in other words, it wasn't that we were going to present to students who could be there face to face and not to those students who might be coming online. So we didn't want to do that, but that's different. There's LSE, for example, are doing things in dual mode. They've decided to do that. So this is we decided to have a sort of connected learning course and a baseline. So we put in place, this is what you absolutely have to do for this baseline. And we populated new templates in our Moodle course, coming to the end now. This was the digital infrastructure that we put in place. So we ended up purchasing quite a lot of new systems or extending and extrapolating new systems, if you like, in place to do with not just teaching, but the student experience, feedback from students, those sorts of things, labs, virtual labs. And then in terms of getting stuff ready, we've produced a course, an online course that we are hoping that staff will go through. It's not mandatory, but we're hoping that staff, if they don't know how to do online learning, they want to find out about it. That's what they will engage with. And these are the topic areas that the sections really of the course. And I think I'm more or less through there, David. So short-term things, just making sure that all staff do the connected learning course. We've recruited large numbers of student interns to help design online teaching, and then we're building a robust digital assessment infrastructure. So I'm going to stop at that point. And okay.
Thank you very much.
And I shall stop sharing my screen. Sorry, David, just be with you in a minute. Okay.
Thank you, Simon. That was a very interesting presentation, and thank you for your honesty as well, and the university's honesty about what worked and what didn't work. Obviously, we are all in a learning situation at the moment. Different institutions trying different things. Some will work, some might not work, but it's good to hear how UCL has dealt with it, and it sounds like a good plan. Obviously, we've just been looking at what UCL has been doing in the UK. UK is UK, and Bangladesh is a slightly different picture, but again, still under the under very difficult circumstances with COVID-19 at the moment. In Bangladesh, of course, the ministries of education closed down all education institutions from about the 20th of March, and it looks at the moment as if those will resume after Eid al-Adha in early August, but no one is quite sure. And obviously there are some discussions. The Honourable Prime Minister has also said that possibly that might be extended until September. Under these circumstances, Professor Masuma, can I ask you how is your university, the Bangladesh Agricultural University, dealing with the situation at the moment?
Thank you, Mr. David Maynard. You already tell something about that. Actually, apart from the economy of a country, the education sector is the worst affected due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Bangladesh government has closed all educational institutions from March 17. Still, we don't know how long the situation will continue. Therefore, the impetus for online teaching in higher education in Bangladesh deserves immediate attention. Meanwhile, 4 months have passed and the students are away from class and exam, and particularly public universities. It is a huge loss of higher education. On 23rd March, the University Grants Commission Bangladesh had requested the universities to conduct online classes. The private universities are conducting online class and evaluation soon after lockdown declaration. However, Bangladesh Agricultural University and other public universities have positively responded to resume their academic activities since the crisis seems to last long. Some universities have already started online classes. The BAU has recently decided to start online MS classes from 9th August 2020. But decision regarding undergraduate classes is not yet taken. Implementation of undergraduate courses is a big discussion issue. A huge number of students, about 100 to 400 in his classes, and majority of the students are living in rural areas with no internet facilities. And BAU, about 40% courses are practical classes. A student needs to work in the laboratory or field lab for learning by doing. It's a bit difficult to conduct online classes in case of practical. Then how can we overcome the situation? This is the big question. But reality is we need to implement it as soon as possible. According to public universities, the challenges for them lies in the lack of infrastructural support. To add on, at least half of the students of public universities come from rural areas. We know that. That is a problem. But however, BAU and many other universities have IT facilities which need to be strengthened. We need to consider the students and teachers' demands and provide technological facilities. Obviously, students demand of a smartphone with minimum charge, for which negotiation with mobile phone company is needed. That's it. Hello.
Thank you very much. Interesting to hear how the university and universities in general in Bangladesh are dealing with this situation. And related to what you've just said, we've had a question from Fahim Ashfaq about the internet and connectivity issue. He says, in Bangladesh, we do not have strong internet connections in much of the country, and it's quite expensive. How should Bangladesh approach towards solving some of these problems so that the maximum number of students can attend online classes? A very good question, particularly in a country like Bangladesh, where we know infrastructure can be patchy. Interestingly, British Council organised a teaching and learning webinar with several private universities and several public universities, including the Bangladesh Open University, a couple of weeks ago on the 29th of July. And at that meeting, there was also A2I, or Access to Information, the Bangladesh government's agency for digitization within the country. And that was a very interesting discussion. And I think there were 4 key points that came out of that discussion from both an academic point of view and an infrastructural point of view. And I'd just like to touch on a few of those. I think one of the key points that was made, particularly from Open University, from the Vice Chancellor of the Open University, is that the curriculum for online courses needs to be tailored to the new circumstances. It's not so easy just to take a face-to-face course and all of a sudden make it online. And Simon, you alluded to that as well. The other issue related to that was very much around training of staff. Many staff, faculty and universities in Bangladesh have not been used to teaching online. And again, Simon, you mentioned this, that staff in the UK have not been used to this either in some cases. So it's a learning curve for all staff and a different way of operating. The second point that came out of that discussion was infrastructure. Clearly, infrastructure, both in terms of internet connectivity, but also in terms of stable electricity and all of those kinds of things, mobile phone connections, is not standardized throughout Bangladesh, and some students really struggle with that. And so that any courses needed to be very much focused on a low-tech solution where high bandwidth internet was not necessary. The third area was around policy, and the fact that in most countries there is not necessarily a policy around how online teaching and learning will be dealt with vis-a-vis face-to-face teaching and learning. And so everyone is struggling a little bit with this because it has different modalities and it's not necessarily being managed in the same way. So that there are some questions there. And finally, the last point, again, something that you've both touched on, was empathy, and the fact that we are all struggling with this new situation. Everyone is finding it difficult. Students, faculty, administrators, the system are all finding it difficult, and so we need to be understanding, to help staff and students work through this, and not to put too much pressure on them. The infrastructural issue was very much a topic that A2I was focused on, and obviously as part of their government mandate, they are looking at that. They've developed a new virtual classroom software, which is being rolled out as we speak. and that is designed to work in very low bandwidth environments with mobile phone. But there were also lots of other measures that were being put in place, and obviously the Bangladesh Open University has a lot of experience in this, so they were, it was quite interesting to hear how they have dealt with this in the past, and that other universities were starting to adopt some of these approaches as well. So it was an interesting discussion, and I'm sure will continue to be a discussion, but it was good to hear that government, UGC, private universities and public universities all recognise these challenges and all working towards making them less of a challenge and more of an opportunity for students and faculty. I'd like to now move on to the area of professional development for staff, because obviously we've already spoken a little bit about this, that working online is quite a different modality to face-to-face teaching. Simon, obviously University College London for many, many years has had distance courses, and so is very, very experienced in delivering these kinds of courses. But still, you've outlined some of the challenges that you still face, even with all of that experience behind you. Could you just tell us a little bit about what UCL is doing in terms of ongoing professional development to ensure that there are standards are maintained, that quality remains high, and all of those issues that keep coming up as questions, or will the quality be as good online?
Can have a go, have a stab at that, David. Yeah, I mean, I can see this kind of splits in lots of different ways, really, because you've got the staff kind of education about online learning, but also you've got students' expectations about what they would get from their university degree. They've come to a primarily a face-to-face institution, and all of a sudden they're being told they're going to go online, and they've never experienced that. They've experienced onlineness. Of course, it's that generation Z is it's the backpack generation. They're used to their mobile devices, etc., but they don't necessarily have the disciplines of studying online. And I think that sometimes that we can get that really, really wrong, because if you've got a staff member who's used to teaching in a face-to-face way, they think, oh, that's fine, I can just record myself kind of teaching. But we all know that you can probably only concentrate on the maximum of sort of 10 minutes of synchronous teaching. So what we've suggested to staff is that if you are going to attempt to do something like that, you can record yourself, but then you need to break that down into small segments. I think the other thing that we were very keen to say to staff is you need to get high quality engagement. So your materials, students don't necessarily expect really highly produced, highly polished materials that maybe the Open University of the UK or Open University of Bangladesh is capable of producing with green screens and high generation cameras and scripts and all those things. Actually, just standing in front of your phone and recording something is probably good enough. But what you need to do is to record high quality engagement. So activities are very, very engaged at a very, very low bandwidth. So whilst we've got, you might be developing virtual environments, synchronous virtual environments, which require low bandwidth. That's not to say that students will, if they're in a synchronous thing and all of a sudden it drops out, they're going to miss out. So what we said at UCL, at least, is go asynchronous. And if there may be times when you want to go synchronous, but actually the principle is to go asynchronous. So have things in place, have activities in place that you can engage your students with in a kind of a reasonable kind of way. Lots of asynchronous discussion forum, for example. We've also experienced in the UK, particularly with our international students from China, where the channels carrying the internet have been problematic, as probably David in British Council you would know that. So and also issues around potentially political issues sort of coming into that. So having discussion fora where maybe there are politics which people are discussing in higher education, which might be quite reasonable to have in one context, but are not reasonable if you're being listened into by your government, for example. So there are also other sort of factors to bear in mind, that actually you don't require your students to enter those discussion forums if they feel very uncomfortable about discussing things, because then they might be kind of concerned about a knock on the door at some point. So I think there's not only the staff training, there's the kind of the expectations that students might have in trying to understand, what that feels like for them. Again, it's that sort of notion about empathy coming through. Yeah, I'll stop at that point, David, to allow Masuma to come in as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Interesting, as you say, focusing on the students and making sure that they are able to deal with this new challenge as well. You showed, as part of your PowerPoint, a sort of website or a page on your website where you were talking about how students' experience is going to be. Have you found that quite successful? People engaging with that?
Yeah, very, very successful. So lots of staff came to that central page, and then they started developing their own kind of discipline focus. So for architecture, it might be quite different because they didn't experience exams in the same way. But we know we did some very interesting research into both the students, the staff, and the students. So with staff, there were certain groups of staff who were quite disadvantaged. So for example, our female academics ended up being at home, but also having to cope with the children, having to do the cooking and teaching online. So they were particularly disadvantaged. Our disabled staff were also found themselves disadvantaged as well. But in terms of students certainly doing the exams, when we switched to 24-hour open book exams, so we got rid of all our face-to-face invigilated exams, we went to open book, and because of the time zones, we said, well, this would normally be a 2-hour exam. You write an essay or a couple of essays, but we're going to give you 24 hours. What often happened is that students would spend 24 hours doing those exams, so they wouldn't be able to control themselves because they wanted to do the best they could do, and they got very stressed out by that. So we're very, very aware of we need to change that for next year, but it's a very hard thing to balance. So making sure that students across time zones are given that level of kind of experience, equal level of experience, but also not trying to get them to, if you state a number, they will probably work to that number, which may be unreasonable.
Yeah. Yes. 24 hours of exam sounds
horrific.
Not particularly pleasant under any circumstances, whether it's COVID-19 or any other circumstance. Interesting. Masuma, just coming back to Bangladesh, in terms of professional development for staff, obviously this is an area that you work in. How are you dealing with that in the Agricultural University?
Okay, thank you, Mr. David Maynard, for a nice question. Now I'd like to tell something about Graduate Training Institute of Bangladesh Agricultural University. Graduate Training Institute, Bangladesh Agricultural University, which is very familiar by its name, GTI, in home and abroad. The institute was established in 1976. The institute is the only institute in Bangladesh which organizes faculty training programs since 1980s. We feel happy to recall that the institute received Presidential Gold Medal for its outstanding contribution. With the active support of UGC, since 2007, the institute organizes foundation training for university teachers by combining some short courses like teaching methods and techniques, research methodology, statistical methods for research, scientific report writing, administration and office management, and so on. And IT skill in teaching, in the present COVID-19 epidemic situation, the IT skill in teaching has a special significance. Near future, we have a plan to include online learning capacity building topics in our foundation training module. I'm very, very happy to share with you that GTI has already started online training program to build up and improve the capacity of faculty members of BAU on online teaching. The title of the ongoing training program is Training on Online Learning Capacity Building. We are actively considering organize these types of training program for other university teachers with the support of UGC in the pandemic situation also. We are giving emphasis on the topic like assessing the level of readiness of institutes and teachers, online learning platform, introduction, content management system, online learning platform using Google Classroom, live video class conduction using Google Classroom, evaluation using Google Forms, class lecture material preparation, offline video lecture recording and recorded video lecture editing, administrative and departmental management, etiquette rules and tips for online meeting or classes, and so on. We sincerely believe that GTI is capable to conduct this type of training to build up the capacity of faculty members of public and private universities efficiently. I came to know that Shahjalal Science and Technology University, SILET, has started these types of training for the teachers. Since social physical distancing is a huge concern to avoid COVID-19 transmission, it would not be possible to open the university soon. Thus, under the situation, we don't have any option without online classes. Further, I think that even after the pandemic situation is over, university should include some online classes in its course. Thank you.
Interesting, thank you. And interesting comment about other universities, SILET, adopting this as well, and that once this particular virus or the wave of the virus moves on, then perhaps a greater focus on online is a good thing anyway. Just a quick question for you. Obviously, as you said, you've been working this way for quite some time, but do you find that staff or faculty have been resistant or struggled in terms of adopting this new way of working, or have they picked this up relatively quickly and easily? Masuma, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Please repeat it again, please. Could you please
Certainly.
repeat it again?
So the question is, with all staff now having to work in a more online way, have you found staff have struggled with this? And how have you dealt with some of those challenges that staff might have?
Yeah, this is a big challenge, to conduct the classes by online teaching. It's a big challenge for a teacher and as well as the students. If I tell about something about the Bangladesh Agricultural University, the 40% class conducted need to conduct in practical. So it's very, very, very difficult by online teaching to conduct these types of class. But anyway, we need to do it. I think we can minimize the challenge.
Yes, well, hopefully. Okay, thank you both very much for your perspectives on faculty development during this current situation. Following on from that, both of you have worked in the Centres of Excellence for Teaching and Learning, the SETLs or KETLs, depending on how you want to pronounce them. British Council has been working with the UGC and with University College London and with many universities in Bangladesh to set up these Centres of Excellence, focusing on improving the quality of teaching and the greater engagement in learning for students. And these now run in many different universities and across both public and private. But since March, obviously, a lot of that activity has stopped. Now, a question to both of you, just in terms of how the settles might look in the future, how do you think they should be adapted or changed to fit a more online approach? Simon, your thoughts first.
Yeah, I think, well, I suppose it's a pivot to the digital. And it's interesting what you were saying, David, I can see from Masuma as well, that there's a big shift. And what we're finding is that we're now able to do things which we've been wanting to do at UCL for a long, long time. So kind of having the affordances of the digital and having that merge, because there are certainly things that you can do in online that you can't necessarily do. So things like sort of time on task, and you continuing that sort of continuous learning, continuous assessment, which we haven't been able to do in a kind of face-to-face. So that is providing us with some real opportunities for accelerating the things that we've wanted to do for some time. I think just in terms of the kettles or settles, I would say that the sort of the enhancements then need to very much focus on how to train staff in terms of using. So it's the skills, you know, the sort of digital literacy of staff is the main thing. Often students will understand how to use the digital better than the staff will. So I think there needs to be sort of a coordinated effort from the settles to upskill their staff, to look at the sorts of things which are possible. But more than anything, I think there is a very useful question from Professor Nasrullah, I think, there about thinking about who the students are. So I didn't show a slide, but one of the things that we did around our student readiness was to look at the students, where they were from in the world, and things around the sort of bandwidth that they might have. And where we felt that their bandwidth was going to be severely compromised, we ended up sending out print-based materials. We are sending out from this term, because we have decided to go online. We can't predict what's going to happen, whether there might be a second spike, and we know that some of our international students won't come back to the UK for this next term. We're sending out things like little lab resources so they can conduct some of those experiments, and we're sending out sort of print materials. The same in Australia. They did the same thing, and they had to hit the online a little bit quicker than we did, because they were already in the assessment time when COVID hit. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Simon. Yes, interesting to see how a mini science kit is going to work, having been sent halfway around the world. But yeah, why not? This is all part of the challenge. Masuma, in terms of the settles, you obviously have experience of working with the Centres of Excellence for Teaching and Learning as part of the Bangladesh Agricultural University. How do you see the settle developing, or the kettle developing, in the future, based on your experience?
I think we need to prepare our teachers for online courses. This is what we need to do now. We need to give emphasis on the topic like online, for the online teaching. I think all the teachers, they are capable to take the online classes, but we need to increase the training so that they will capable to take the online classes. So we could do by CTS like this. Thank you.
David, you're muted.
Muted, yeah.
One of the beginners' mistakes that we all find ourselves constantly making is being muted. Apologies. Thank you both very much for your time today and for your interesting perspectives, both from the UK and from Bangladesh. And it's great to see that the UK and Bangladesh are working together on some of these challenges, and that we will continue to work together. British Council, University College London, universities in Bangladesh, to make sure that the experience for staff and for students is a rich and quality one, and an engaging one. It was wonderful hearing from you both. Look forward to continuing the conversation and continuing to work with you in the future. To all of our viewers and listeners, thank you for your questions. Many questions seem to relate to infrastructure issues, and clearly internet connectivity is one of the biggest issues that we have. Clearly that's not something that can be solved overnight. It's not something that individual institutions can solve either. So that will take some time, but it was good to hear last month that the government is very much focused on this and focused on finding solutions for this, and low-tech, low bandwidth solutions. Please do keep the questions coming. If you have any further questions, even if it's not now, if you think of something else later, please do post those and we will get back to you shortly. We look forward to seeing you again in future discussion rounds on various educational discussions around education in Bangladesh during these exceptional circumstances. I thank you very much for your time today, and to our special guests. Wonderful to see you both, and look forward to seeing you face to face at some stage in the not too distant future. Thank you, and good night to you in Bangladesh. Good afternoon to you in London. Thanks again. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.